Hey everybody, before I get started, I just want to mention a couple of ways that you can engage with me on a more personal level. I have a few avenues set up and I keep focusing on one, and I figured why don't I make a short little video talking about all of them real quick before we get into these episodes. So first thing, Patreon. There's a link in the episode description, in every episode description to the Patreon, as well as a video on the feed called Major Announcement that has all the details of what each tier offers and how much they cost. I implore you to check that out. I offer a lot of cool shit for my patrons. Second thing, the Discord channel. There's also a Discord link in the episode description and in every episode description. I have multiple channels set up there for each show that I'm covering, and it's a great way to just engage with me. I have a channel set up for MMA talk as well. I'm a big MMA fan, so if you're an MMA fan, you can check that out as well. There's a link to the Discord in the episode description. And then lastly, the Facebook and Twitter. Social media. Follow me on there. I post news on there. When I say news, I mean like, hey, I'm stopping covering this show. Hey, I'm starting covering this show. Let me know what you think about this. I do live watches of things on Facebook where like I'll check in and say I'm watching so-and-so show, and then I'll like live comment while I'm watching it, and that'll be cool if maybe you watch that show too and you want to watch along with me, or you're watching it later and you will see my thoughts, which are usually pretty entertaining because I'm usually pretty high when I'm writing them. So check out all those links in each episode description, and let's talk about this episode. Peace.
One mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, and today I'm here to talk about Season 5, Episode 10, the Season 5 finale of FX's Fargo, titled Bisquik. The reason for this episode title is pretty obvious here. It's referencing the final 20 minutes or so, and the conversation that takes place over Bisquik and chili preparation. As well as also, I think, the closing shot, which is not unlike the face that I would make if I was taking a bite into a delicious biscuit or some cornbread or something like that. And I think that the final 20 minutes or so is probably what makes or breaks this episode, and maybe even the season for some of you out there. So that's where I want to start and where I want to spend the most time. Even as I was kind of like starting to prepare my notes to talk about this episode, I was still a bit conflicted on where I stood on that final 20 minutes and this episode as a whole and the season as a whole. The place I landed at is kind of similar to where I landed after watching the finale of The Curse, Showtime's The Curse. The final episode of The Curse, and I'm not going to spoil it here if you plan on watching it or anything like that, as a standalone episode of television, it was pretty fucking cool, and I appreciated the big, huge, mighty swing that show took by not just making that episode, but making that episode be the finale. But as a finale to a very tedious season that I dedicated a fuck ton of time to, that I expected to have kind of all come around at the end, it was highly unsatisfactory as a finale. So it's like, as an episode of television, as a finale, I didn't quite land on those extremes for the Fargo finale or that 20-minute portion, but broadly speaking, the final portion of the episode was really good on its own. But within that episode and as the final portion of the season, I just don't think it worked for me. Now, I've seen the glowing praise for that portion of the episode, and I get it. I truly do. It spoke to a lot of the themes present throughout the season, as well as just ideas that I generally support, like kindness, thoughtfulness, and forgiveness. One thing I liked about that scene is, if you remember, at the very beginning of the season, they defined that term, Minnesota nice. They said it was a quote, an aggressively pleasant demeanor, often forced, in which a person is chipper and self-effacing no matter how bad things get. And there's a lack of authenticity to the kindness in that definition. But in this final scene, I think Dot and her family kind of like Minnesota nice munched to death. Munk. But it came from an authentic place, and I liked that variation on the term. Speaking of authenticity, I liked how Wayne offered him a pop and not a soda. Someone did their homework on that one. But speaking of Wayne, though, part of what didn't work for me in this final 20 minutes or so was Wayne. You know, in retrospect, his behavior, it fits in with them just being Minnesota nice. But at the time, there was a tonal conflict there that was not just... I don't want to use a negative term to describe it. I'll just say it was confusing for me. Like, it was clear that Dot and Munch were dead serious about what was happening here. Very serious scene. But Wayne was acting as if Munch was just a normal person who had come to stop by and not fucking Anton Chigurh from fucking No Country for Old Men. And I kept thinking, like, is he putting on a calm demeanor, or is he just this goddamn stupid and oblivious? And I don't think I should have been thinking that in that moment. Like, I was wondering if at the start of the scene, I was wondering if it was supposed to be funny because Wayne's energy was in such stark contrast to Munch and Dot's. And I'm like, this is either supposed to be funny, or they chose the final scene to make me believe that Wayne's a complete and total fucking idiot. So like I don't know. It was very, I won't say very confusing, but it was enough to take me out of the moment. Speaking of Anton Chigurh, is Munch not a shameless and inferior replica of that character? Like, one thing I've been saying all season is how repetitive this season has felt. Continuous, we tried to get Dot and failed episodes, recycled jokes, the copying and pasting of ideas from season 1 and season 2. Munch just feels like a totally unoriginal character to me within this universe. Further, on the repetitive piece, someone left a comment on my last video about how Munch brings the fog in response to me complaining about the conveniently arriving fog and reminding me about the supernatural nature of this show, which, I mean, I covered season 4. I've seen all 5 seasons. I'm richly aware of the supernatural nature of the show. I don't fault that person for leaving that comment. I just feel that kind of speaks to my point of how nothing felt original with this season. Much just felt like an amalgamation of several other villains I've already seen elsewhere in other Coen-based projects. And then the final scene, it becomes this weird episode of Dr. Phil where Munch is being Minnesota nice into changing his views on debt vis-a-vis repayment versus forgiveness. It just kind of all felt out of tone with the rest of the season. I also felt like the setup for that scene was kind of flimsy too. Like, for a significant portion of that scene, I was completely unclear on why Munch was even there in the first place. And he's like, oh, just because I saved your life so you get revenge doesn't mean I don't want revenge for my ear. And I'm just like, oh, okay, I guess. Like, I don't know, it felt like a very forced way of reintegrating Munch into this episode and having this specific scene. And I guess my main issue is that I wish I could have appreciated that scene more than I did, but it just conflicted tonally so much with everything else that I spent most of my time watching it, wondering what exactly they were going for. Real quick, another example. After Munch has decided he's gonna help them cook, he keeps trying to talk about how a man has a code, and he keeps getting interrupted to measure milk or get out of the way. And that was a really funny moment to me. But in that moment, rather than appreciate that it was a funny scene, I was just kind of confused because humor just really seemed to undermine, I think, also the tension that I felt like they were going for in that scene. And then later, when they're at the table eating, Munch is doing one of his long monologues about his past and what a man went through. Side note, anytime he refers to himself as what a man did, it makes me think of Jack and Hagar from Game of Thrones. And Dot says something to the effect of like, yeah, I don't know what any of that means, but food made with love can be the cure. And like, I appreciated the wink at the audience. It's kind of like, yeah, we don't expect you to pick up on all the shit that Munch be talking about. But again, just more examples of how the tonal conflict, like it wasn't off-putting to me per se, but it just impacted my ability to sit back, relax, and enjoy the scene in the moment. Because I just kept wondering, like, what's happening here? Like, now is it trying to be funny? Like, I don't know. But as for the rest of the episode, it also had its ups and downs, and I'm kind of gonna alternate between what I liked and what I didn't hear. For starters, I loved everything, and loved everything with Gator at the very beginning of the episode. Like, visually, I just love those wide shots of the open plains covered in snow with just a tree and a blindfolded, stumbling, whining Gator in the shot. That plus the fog really helped me, I think, get a better feel for what Gator must have been feeling in that moment. Like, I thought those scenes were pretty intense because for us as viewers, I felt like the visual desolation and isolation helped us understand Gator's fright, being blindfolded and blinded and having no way to like really orient himself. Like that just I can't see shit and I have no idea where I am. I don't even know if I'm facing the right direction. I just thought the desolation and isolation of those wide shots of the snow and the fog just kind of helped us as the audience understand that isolated, confused, and lost feeling that Gator was probably feeling. Then at the same time, on the flip side, I wasn't really happy with the end to Whit Farr's story. Like, by the time he died, I felt like he deserved it because he just refused to shoot a total piece of shit who was begging to be shot. And I'm just like, okay, well, if you gotta go shoot him, then fine. You fucking deserve to get stabbed. Then later, Dot, Scotty, and Indira are standing at his grave, and they're like, yeah, he had a wife. He didn't have a wife, but he had a cat. And he had 6 sisters, and they came to his funeral. I'm just like, damn, I'm learning a lot about Whit now that he's dead. But again, alternating back and forth between what I liked and what I didn't, I really liked the scene where Roy's father-in-law, the tough guy on the outside, but the big, huge, gaping pussy who spits on the ground and thinks it's intimidating, that guy, he's emasculating Roy in this scene. And Roy's just like, you know what, man? You know what, old man? Let's just duke it out, man. Let's just put him up. And then the old man takes his jacket off and shit. He's like, yeah, I'm about to fuck you up. And then Roy just turns around and cuts his throat. And I love that scene. For starters, fuck his father-in-law. But secondly, I thought at the time having them fist fight would have really fit Roy's character. Like, that seemed like something Roy would really do. Like, you know what? I'm just gonna beat your motherfucking ass. But having him skip the fight altogether and just cutting his father-in-law's throat, that was even more fitting for Roy. So I really like that. And then, after he did it, dude's clutching at the wound and shit, and then Roy pulls his hand down so he can't, stop the bleeding. Total badass. Love that moment. But then, he chases his wife around the corner of the porch, runs into Dot, who's holding a shotgun. She shoots him in the fucking stomach, and he literally walked it off. like I'm no doctor, but I've seen a lot of movies where people get shot. And I'm not sure if I've ever seen one where someone takes a shotgun blast to the stomach and not only walks it off, runs it off. Like, and if that happened to Munch, I'd totally buy it, right? Because they built him as this kind of like mystical, supernatural, evil force who's lived through all these centuries of sin eating. So I'd grant Munch some moments that just don't seem possible. But Roy is a regular motherfucker who is special in no way whatsoever other than quoting the Bible and beating the shit out of women. I don't see how he lives through a shotgun blast to the stomach, let alone runs away when no one is looking, and then still has the energy to kill Whit Farr later. Didn't like that. Roy makes it out through the same exit as Gator and is immediately arrested. And then they flash forward to 1 year later. Lorraine visits him in prison, and we learn that Roy is going to have a really hard time there with his sentence because Lorraine has paid off the debts and upped the commissary payments for virtually everyone in the prison in exchange for fucking with him. I'd be curious as to whether or not this felt like a satisfying ending for Roy for you guys. I'd imagine having him survive a shotgun blast to the stomach and then also be assured of living through his prison term might not have been the desirable outcome for you guys, but I mean, you can let me know what you thought about that in the comments. It is consistent with Lorraine's strategy of long-term punishments for people. If we remember what she did to that Vivian guy who wouldn't sell her his bank. All in all, though, if you were a huge fan of this season, I don't fault you for it. It's pretty similar to the best seasons of the show. It's just that for me, it felt repetitive and it felt more like a watered-down version of the best seasons. Very little felt original. And there were some pretty big letdowns, like the time it took to get to the Home Alone sequence, and then the Home Alone sequence itself was kind of a pretty big disappointment. We didn't even get to see him use the bat with the fucking nails. Anyway, conversely, John Hamm, Juno Temple, absolutely outstanding. But aside from that, little else stood out. Lamar Morris, I'm sorry, he was great as well. If this were the first time I'd seen this show, I'd have probably loved it. But like I said, it felt like a bunch of ideas taken from other places and shoved into this carbon copy of season 1 and season 2. And I only found myself marginally entertained by this show after like the first 2 episodes or so. And I know there's not a lot of agreement with me out there. I don't do this shit for agreement, you guys. Just giving my thoughts. That's why I don't call shit. Like, I don't say something is good or bad most of the time. I just say this is what I thought. I liked it or I didn't like it. But regardless, I've watched all 5 seasons of this show, and if we get a 6, I will be right back here to talk about it on day 1. So until that time, if we get that season, peace.